Kristen, what's been your experience with the spirit of Jezebel?
When you don't deal with Jezebel, Jezebel deals with you. That was me. Probably for the next week and a half, it was like physical torment. You're only gonna see the Kristen that I let you see. Biggest point of breakthrough that's ever happened in my life was.
Kristen, what's been your experience with the spirit of Jezebel? By the way, side note, if you want to see your testimony, it's actually in our testimonies playlist, and Kristen's is there. I think it's Why I Left the Church, I think is the title.
Yes.
So go ahead.
So my experience with Jezebel around me or operating in Jezebel?
Either one. I'm not saying any of it. You talk about whatever you want to.
So I believe for the beginning of my life, I definitely started out as just Jezebel's around me. You know, I was very much, and it's part of my testimony as well. If you go and watch it, you'll see me talk about I was very much just a people pleaser. You know, like my whole life, that's all I wanted to do, just make people happy with me. I don't want conflict. You know, if I have to take the brunt of everything, I will. You know, like that. Fine, I'll be your doormat. You can step on me. It's okay. But somewhere along the line that definitely changed in my adult years. And I would want to say maybe with some of the things that went on with my family, like my parents split up really traumatically. There was a lot of hurt that happened there. And I feel like that's probably where the Jezebel entered me, or at least affected me in a really heavy way. And it was just through the masking of the hurt, you know. So there was a lot of offense that I carried with authority figures in my life. And instead of dealing with the hurt that came from my parents splitting up, I just kind of kept kicking it down to other people. Like whatever I was lacking from my parents, I just kicked on to the next person. Maybe you can give me what I want. And then when they would hurt me, it just opened that wound up again, you know, and it was like, fine, all right, I'll go to the next person, you know. And so I believe it was just a really long process of not knowing that it was there. And when I was actually just reminiscing on this today, thinking about this evening, when we first started this a year ago, I remember watching the videos of Jezebel. And of course I could think of people in my life that was like, yeah, for sure, you got Jezebel. But then there was other details where it was like, oh, oh crap, that might be me.
Well,
you know? But it's in the subtle, the backdoor ways, you know, the doing everything in my own strength. I have to do everything with excellence, and I pride myself in that, you know. So I have to be in control of everything. You know, I'm going to do everything with excellence. I'm going to do my best with everything, and I'm just going to act like I have it all together, you know. And so it's this micromanaging, you know, you're only going to see the Kristen that I let you see, you know, and putting up that really strong front.
It's wild because even thinking back, so Meredith and I did you and Braden's marriage counseling. And when we started the counseling, I feel like that's where I saw the biggest breakthrough for you.
Absolutely.
Because you were confronted with certain things, and things that were going on in your life were pushing that out. So it was the process that you were going through, whether we knew it at the time that it was you, but even some of the symptoms that would show up, and I remember you starting to shift from that to me. Is it me? The mirror turned from
Yes.
here. And so you really just paved the way for us as setting the example of dealing with Jezebel, because the things you were doing in excellence were in your own strength.
Absolutely.
And they left no room for the grace of God to move. And so when things started kind of falling in on you, right as you're getting married, right as you're planning your wedding and all this stuff kind of breaks loose, I remember Meredith and I just sitting there, and we had really hard conversation with you, and very direct, very hard, and you took it, and it hurt. It hurt. And talk about that.
Yeah, that's actually, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel like that's the biggest point of breakthrough that's ever happened in my life was you guys loving me enough to correct me, but also walk through that process with me, because, you know, talking through that story of you know, I know we joke about it behind the scenes sometimes when Jezebel gets riled up. It's claws are out. Claws were out. I mean, they were rough. And so it was a healthy challenge, and it was exactly what I needed to hear and exactly what needed to happen. But in my flesh and in my control, it's not what I wanted, And so the hurt that I had carried from past mentors and parents and everything, I, without knowing, had just automatically placed that on you and Miss Meredith, and what I had this expectation of how everything was supposed to go. And when we went through counseling, we started breaking that apart. It was like the only way I can explain it is like, here's my spirit and here's my flesh, and they're being ripped into different, situations. And like you said, like I was in the beginning of this process. So this is not like a brand new, like, okay, we're fresh out of the gate. This is like I'm 4 years into this process and this is just now being uncovered. Yeah. And so like I think back to what you said at the beginning, when you don't deal with Jezebel deals with you. That was me. Yeah. So when that happened and that process started, it was like that spirit really just like reared her claws, and it was like, we say in here, the enemy comes after the word's sake. I received a prophetic word from Apostle George, actually, and he told me I was going to be loyal to you guys for 40 years. And so that moment, it was like Jezebel was going to come after that with everything. And what I want everybody to understand about like spirits like this and the power that we're breaking down is, yes, Christians can't be possessed, but the oppression can be so real that it does shift your actions, So going through this process, I remember logically I could think through everything, and I was sitting there and that, like, I remember my feelings sitting there in the meeting. I was like, okay, logically I understand everything that you're saying and it makes sense. That's the spirit side. And the flesh is like, you hate me, you don't even look, so it's like it was just this total opposite thing, where it's just pulled in every direction. And probably for the next week and a half, it was like physical torment, from the spirit side combating the flesh. Like the Jezebel spirit was trying anything possible from that, since that wound was just ripped right open again because I didn't deal with it. She was trying anything possible to make me leave the ministry. Yeah. And I remember being in that point, and like I have always the first one there and last one to leave. And when that was happening, I was the last one to show up and the first one to leave. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't look anybody in the eyes. I would wake up crying. I'd go to bed crying, and it was like this. I've never, even in all the other deliverances I've been a part of, never been the person that was suicidal or wanted to harm myself. And I remember my flesh being in such anguish. And of course it was demonically prompted. It was I don't care if I died right now. I don't care if this whole wedding gets canceled. I can't believe that this would happen to me. And that was totally the Jezebel spirit behind it, trying to twist it and manipulate it and make me the victim when I was actually the problem to begin with. Wow.
So some of the guys that are in our church, this is the first time you're actually publicly hearing this. And I think it's important for our body to actually understand this, because we haven't really addressed this publicly. We've been addressing this privately. And for some of us in the body, you're like, well, what's the process look like? Well, you're looking at the process. Because in this, Kristen had to confront the things that she didn't really want to confront. And that moment of saying that I was going to leave, I wanted to leave, how many of us in our past have left the place that we were supposed to be because we're running and using an excuse instead of going through the process? So her process has been a long time, where it could have been maybe a couple years. Mine was 13 years, and longer than that, but 13 years, and it could have been a lot shorter. So what would you say, to someone that may be struggling with this, that's hearing what you're talking about and they can identify it? What would you say, what advice would you give them?
I think definitely the first thing right off is make sure you're in submission to authority, the breaking point for what I was going through, I had an encounter with the Lord like early in that process, and it was through a session of inner healing that our brother Steve from the gathering like was pulling me through. And so I had gone through that encounter, and I had gotten like the spiritual revelation on it, but I still, like, in my mind, I still wanted to be heard, you know. And I remember telling you, like, the day that I actually got the deliverance for this, I remember telling you I was ready to come in here and chew your head off. And when I walked into the room, I was in tears, you know. I was like, I'm so sorry, you know, just in like full repentance, because I realized the authority that you were in. Not that I didn't know it before, but for this situation, it's like I understood finally, you know, like I put my flesh to the side long enough to be like, okay, what he's telling me is maybe not what I want, but it's what I need. You know, it's exactly what I need. And so for anybody that's going through this, like, that has to be the first thing, because if you're trying to do this by yourself, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how strong you are. I don't care how strong you are, because I used to think the same thing. Well, I'm tough. I can handle it. You know, you can't. You can't do this by yourself, you know, and the people that are in authority over you, they're in that spot for a reason, you know, and just to submit to the process and allow the Lord to do that burning, you know, like just getting the impurities out of there, and don't be like me and like let it drag out and continue to let the wounds open back up.
So you were a part of this, but a contrast to this story, we were meeting in my garage, and we had a lady who had actually saw some of the deliverance stuff that we produced, the reels and stuff. So she sought us out, and she drove maybe an hour or two to come gather with us. And as she came, we as a body confronted her and told her spiritually what has been going on, because she was practicing deliverance, and she wasn't locked in with a local body. She wasn't submitted to authority. And I will say authority that like was really holding her accountable. And so she came to our body. We all sat around her, and we're like, we see this spirit's in operation. You try to do deliverance. It took advantage of a wound that you hadn't dealt with. And she's like, yep, that's right. I would have said that to myself. So she agreed, she received, and then she turned around and left to only bash us and to take another lady who's precious with her, and just completely bashed us. And she ended up like persecuting the very thing that she needed. And I watched that spirit of Jezebel like completely manifest, because it got touched, but the lady wasn't ready to receive. And so she ran and then doubled down. And then we were the problem instead of her. We see this so many times with people who think they know what's really going on, but in reality, they don't. And if you touch something that is like a golden calf or is an idol or something that's not, they're not willing to let go of, like, it can really rile some stuff up. But this lady specifically, when she recognized that, like, maybe she should, we basically told her she should take a step down from doing deliverance. She needed a rest so that she could heal, and it just got twisted. And it was crazy because we got to see that paralleled. And now we've got a couple of people that are walking through this in our body that are truly submitted and going through the process, and it's beautiful. But the process isn't easy. And it's messy. And it's just difficult. And so, anything else you want to say to anyone who's battling the spirit?
Yeah, I can't think of much else. I mean, like that, when you fall in order, everything else does too, you know? So when you're submitted in the places that you're supposed to be submitted to, when you submit to authority, everything else gathers up under that, you know? So it's like you're going through the process. Like, number one, it's a steadfast process. You know, you have to put your foot to the fire no matter how much it burns, and you just have to get it done, you know, like not in your own strength, but with, like, if you're submitted to authority, God's grace is going to be there for you to be able to do that, you know? And so then everything else comes in order. and just continuing to do that. It's for some people it is like a one and done thing, but most of the time it's like continuous choices that we have to make to keep the deliverance, you know. And there's times where it's like I still would love to put my hand in something, but I remember what happened when I did have my hand in something, and I remember the process that it took to rip me out of that, you know. And it's like the risk is much, much worse than how good it would feel to be in control of that, you know? So like stay steadfast with the process. If it hurts, like there's a reason for the burning. There's a reason for the push, and to trust and submit to the people that are over you, you know?
And it's interesting because it was right before your wedding, and then your wedding was just gorgeous. It was amazing for all of us to be a part of it. And it was like right before you're getting married, this happens. And then with Braden, which actually I'll bring Braden up here in a second, so you can get prepared, Braden. But with Braden, there's a process for him at the same time in preparation for this.
Right.
And so I find it interesting that it was right before your wedding day. And I feel like that's why marriage counseling is so important.
Absolutely.
Because especially with going through the process.
Yeah, I totally second that. And then, you know, when he comes in here, I'm sure he'll say the same thing. But it's like the process that we went through beforehand, I believe, is what has made our marriage what it is. You know, like our wedding day, like there was a really hard process beforehand, but I believe it would have been ruined if we hadn't gone through that process. You know, there would have been so many things that we stepped into our marriage with that didn't need to be in our marriage, you know, with me having the Jezebel spirit and, you know, some of his struggles as well. Like the counseling process beforehand was like a sanctification of what we're about to step into.